introduce today's speaker, who is Van Oldham with EverGreen Infrastructure. We are very excited to have Van here today. He is a professional engineer and owner of EverGreen Infrastructure, newly rebranded for some of you all who are familiar. He specializes in the ongoing inspection and service of stormwater infrastructure to ensure high functioning and compliant systems. He has a background in civil engineering and received his degree from Tennessee Tech. So please join me in welcoming Van.
Thanks. So with that, we'll just go ahead and get started. I always like to tell people a little bit about myself, but at the very beginning, I am a licensed civil engineer. I'm from here. I think that makes us unicorns now, Robert. People who grew up around here, we just, there's not that many of us left anymore. Everybody's from somewhere else. I grew up here, lived here my whole life, graduated from Tennessee Tech, went to work at TDOT right out of school for a few years, and then I came home from work one day, and I lived behind the Walmart in Knoxville, and not the good Walmart, the bad Walmart. And I think it may have even been a Kmart at the time. And my wife, my brand new wife, had been married like weeks, had been looking at a magazine on my coffee table about places to live in America if you wanted to do outside kind of activities, and she knew I liked to camp and fish and stuff like that. And so she wanted to go to anesthesia school, and I knew that was something she wanted to do. And she started looking at those towns, and it dawned on her, why don't we look at it going to graduate school in one of these places? And so I got home from work, and she said, hey, guess what I did today? And I said, what? And she said, I applied for anesthesia school. And I was like, that's awesome. We already live in Knoxville. It's the greatest university in the world, even though I went to Tennessee Tech. And she said, well, I applied in Maine. And I said, do you think maybe we should have talked about that? And she was like, no, I don't. She said, I thought you would go with me. And I was like, yeah, I'll definitely do that. I didn't actually think she would get in. And then next thing I knew, I was packing a U-Haul and moving to Maine. And it actually ended up really good because it allowed me to get involved with a company called Contech. And what happened there is I started learning about water quality and water quantity. I started learning how to design. I was responsible for most of the stuff that was going on in Western Canada and Western New York, and just fell in love with it. And after that, just moved with my job from there. And we thought we were going up there for her to do that, and it actually kind of ended up being for me. We moved down to San Antonio, then we moved up to Denver. We were in LA for a while. I've worked everywhere west of the Mississippi that you can imagine. So stormwater regulations across the whole country. I've kind of watched them evolve. When low impact development was first rolling out in Baltimore, we were living in Baltimore. It was a strange time, and it really prepared me for being able to come home someday. And we had 4 kids along the way, and she had another conversation with me after I'd got off yet another airplane where that it was like, hey, I'm gonna move home, and I think it'd be great if you went too. And so sure enough, we moved back to Tennessee, and I started EverGreen. With the idea that I thought that there were HOAs particularly, but also lots of other folks that are property owners that were out there that had this infrastructure, didn't really know what it was, and had requirements for it to get maintained, requirements for it to get inspected, and I thought I could help those people. So because there's folks on live stream and not everybody's super technical, I'm going to talk just a little bit about what that means. And what that means is non-point source pollution. So non-point source pollution is basically everything that you see. So when it rains, it runs off the roof, it runs off the parking lot, it runs off the golf course, and when it does, it carries pollution to the storm drains that ultimately ends up in the lake and causes a lot of problems. Now you've all seen this, of course. You've seen it in an oil slick in a parking lot. That's non-point source pollution. But what you oftentimes don't see is things like that golf course. It makes the grass beautiful with all the fertilizer and the weed killer and all that stuff. That stuff dissolves and it ends up in the lake, causes algae blooms, algae dies, and then it soaks up all the dissolved oxygen. It goes anoxic, it kills everything. I mean, it's a real mess. One of the biggest pollutants, of course, and TDEC would tell you if they were here that the biggest pollutant in the Tennessee waterways is sediment. And a lot of that comes from construction runoff like this here. but it also comes post-construction as well. And the reason sediment is such an issue is because this is what sediment looks like when it's really small. So if you put it under a scanning electron microscope and you zoom down to 20 microns, that's about the size of like what gets caught in your fingerprint. What you'll notice is that this is what it looks like. It's plate-like in structure and it's super, super sticky. It's like a mud ball. You know, when you're a kid, you used to cake a mud ball and throw it. The reason it does that is because it's super sticky. That's one of the characteristics of colloids, but the problem with that is it sticks to everything else too. So metals and phosphorus and nitrogen, viruses, bacteria, all kinds of stuff that's in the stormwater ends up in the lake because it gets transported there by the sediment. This is all regulated, and it started being regulated back in the 70s, and then it kind of evolved over the last 40 or 50 years. The way it generally works is it starts at the EPA. The EPA makes regulations for the states, and then the states hand that down locally. Starts out with what they call the phase 1 cities, the big cities like Nashville, Memphis, Chattanooga, Knoxville, maybe the Tri-Cities, but then it ultimately gets rolled out to phase 2, which is basically everybody else. For a long time, the rules here were a lot worse or strict, depending on how you look at it, than the rules over here. That's pretty much gone away at this point. So now, if you're building a storage system in Oak Grove or you're building one in Nashville, the rules are essentially pretty much the same, not a dramatically big departure. It's all regulated under Nashville. They're kind of the tip of the spear. The reason for that is it costs a lot of money to start a stormwater program, and so what ends up happening is they roll out the regulations and then everybody around just kind of copies it, is basically sort of what happens. So that is essentially the story of how it kind of gets started. It really starts here in this area in the mid-'80s is really when you start to see it roll out with volume 1. I know it says 2016 right there, but the truth is it started, really around the 80s with flood control and detention ponds. Over time, it began to evolve and change, and now we have these kinds of things happening. So this is a violation letter. I see these all the time. HOAs get these, or property managers get these. They don't know what to do with it, and it's all based on the fact that they got a grading permit way back in 2001, and they're like, what am I supposed to do? I don't even know what this is. So a big focus of this presentation is the lessons learned over the last 6 years of doing stormwater maintenance and inspection here in Middle Tennessee and everywhere else. I'm sorry, my phone keeps ringing. And the biggest lesson learned, I think, to start with is documentation. The vast majority of people who own this infrastructure don't even know that they have it. They don't even know that it exists. They don't even know that they are responsible for it until someday someone shows up and says that they are. So that happens on a pretty regular basis with me. So the question number 1 is, who is responsible for this? That's the thing that I get asked all the time. Generally speaking, when they start talking about stormwater, they'll say, hey, the city takes care of stormwater. I've got some flooding back here, or the water's up on the backside of my property. I'm going to call the city. And I usually say, well, when your roof shingles wear out, do you call the city about that? It's private property. It doesn't make any difference. The city couldn't fix it if they wanted to, right? It's the same as like with your roof going bad. So it's very similar to that. And then the next thing they want to know is, well, what's required? Okay, what is it I'm supposed to do? Well, the manual in Nashville says that when you turn in a site plan as an engineer, you're going to have to fill out a long-term maintenance agreement. And then that's going to be assigned as a deed restriction that's going to go with the property basically forever. And essentially everyone else has kind of adopted that same strategy. If you go into the details of this particular document, it plainly says that the property owner or owners are responsible for inspection and maintenance. So the burden is definitely on the property owner, and that's something that's oftentimes misunderstood. In addition to that, if you get into the actual meat of what's required on a regular basis, it'll start talking about annual reporting. If you get into the long-term maintenance agreement itself, it'll say that you're supposed to do annual reporting, and then you're supposed to do maintenance as needed, is basically what happens. And then every 5 years, you have to have a professional engineer actually do the maintenance. So I started my business with the idea of being able to provide that at an absolute minimum. Next question that I get asked all the time is this documented on the plat, and can I get a copy? That is, I think, a fundamental misunderstanding of what a plat is. A plat is just an illustration of the legal language that's in the deed, right? So it's go from this corner south 19 degrees, 35 minutes, 1 second east, 131.89 feet. That's what a plat is, okay? It just illustrates what's in the legal documentation, okay? You're not gonna ever find anything on the plat about stormwater usually. Sometimes they'll throw stuff on there, but generally speaking, it's not on there. There may be drainage easements and stuff, but outside of that, you just don't see that much on there. What you really need to get if you are a property manager or if you are someone that owns a piece of property is the original construction plans. Those original construction plans are just priceless, and they're really hard to get a hold of. Once that the project is built, it's 5 or 6 years old, those things are gone, and it is really hard to get them back after they're gone. This is an example of some construction plans for a subdivision that was over in the Mount Juliet area. And you can see that this document will illustrate all the different stages of construction, and it details the stormwater features both during and after construction, and that's really key. The erosion control plans that are happening during construction is one kind of stormwater. That's the silt fences and the sediment basins and all that. But what happens after construction is when those ponds get converted to something else, and that's really a fine dividing line. It's really important that you actually understand both. And those construction plans will have the details that's here on the left that show exactly, what that's ultimately supposed to look like. Nowadays, though, and this wasn't the case until just recently, but nowadays what we're seeing is this, as-built details and calculations. I'm starting to see all over the place. It was just Franklin that was requiring this, but now Nashville is. Spring Hill's requiring it too. You guys may require it here in Sumner County. Marshall said yes. So what's happening now is these ponds, for a long time, they were just built and no one actually checked to see if the volume was really what the volume was supposed to be. What's happening now is that we're actually going out after construction is finished and resurveying the pond to make sure that the holding volume is actually the right holding volume. So if we can get those as-built surveys, we can get those as-built plans, that's also super important for long-term stormwater compliance. So how much of this is there? And the answer is a lot. This is a picture of Nashville's parcel viewer. So they have a GIS system just like a lot of the counties do now. Nashville's parcel viewer, though, actually has a layer that you can go to and it'll pull up the stormwater features, which is really, really nice. And every one of those little yellow flowers is a stormwater feature on a property in Metro Nashville. It's estimated that there's about 8,000 of those properties, not flowers, 8,000 properties in Nashville that have some kind of stormwater feature on it. In addition to that, there's 100 new ones every single month. So if you think about that, how that looks, it's obvious if there's a subdivision or a commercial strip mall or whatever. What's not obvious is when they go in with like an HPR. When you guys see these like an old ranch house that's in Oak Hill or something like that, and it's an acre, and they go in, they knock it down, and they put up 4 skinnies. Well, they've increased the impervious cover so much when they do that it triggers stormwater. And so a lot of those little HPRs will have permeable pavers or bioretention or something other. So you see that all over the place. This is what that long-term maintenance agreement looks like. Like I said, it is a deed restriction. It is filed in the Register of Deeds office, and it goes with the property basically forever. So question number 3 I get, what are silt fences? People ask me that all the time. What are silt fences? What happens at turnover? What am I supposed to do? I deal with a lot of property managers. And silt fences, and a good turnover example is back to this one. This is the one in Mount Juliet like I was talking about. This is an example of a sediment basin that was essentially, the developer was ready to turn it over, okay? So what you can see is it's all setted in, right? It's really got a lot of sediment in it. It needs to be hogged out. They need to do an as-built survey, but none of that was happening. This device here is called a Faircloth skimmer, as a lot of you guys know, but it's got the top of it's been torn off and taken away for some reason. So this was just kind of left. And the HOA was really concerned about inheriting this and then having to maintain it as per Wilson County or Mount Julius regulations. So they worked with me, and basically what I did is I went out and did a preemptive inspection, and we turned that over to the board, and the board gave it to the county, and that prompted the county to provide a maintenance, to require maintenance prior to the bond release. And ultimately we received as-built, and the county, essentially by doing that, had kind of established a baseline for the HOA, because this is the point where that the county said, okay, we're good with it. So anything past that was, you know, we're just trying to get back to that point in the future, if that makes sense. So moving on. So question number 4, what has to be done and when? So this is the part of my presentation where I really kind of talk to you guys about lessons learned, specifics, right? So the BMPs or SEMs, whatever you want to call them, the things that we have done and the things that we have seen that work and what doesn't work. But I think it's really important to get that background because a lot of people just don't have it, and I want to make sure I give that opportunity. So it depends on what kind of stormwater device that you have. So if you have a detention pond, or if you have bioretention, or you have a proprietary device, the requirements for what you have to do for inspection and maintenance radically change if you want it to actually be successful and function the way you want it to. And you always have to keep in mind what it is we're trying to do, which is to trap that sediment. The sediment is always there. It doesn't matter if it's bioretention, permeable pavers, proprietary filters, whatever. Sediment is the thing that's trying to clog it up. And so we have to keep that in mind constantly with what you're doing. I like to start with detention ponds, and the reason I like to start with detention ponds or dry ponds is because that's what we have the most of. We've been doing detention or dry ponds here in Middle Tennessee since at least the late 80s, maybe even before that, in little places here and there. Sometimes I get calls from subdivisions that are super old, and they'll have a detention pond. It won't be a really great functioning detention pond, but they'll have one. And that's kind of when they started popping up. Usually what we see is a lot of erosion around the inlet structures and the outlet structures, because once they're armored and then they get off the site, that kind of goes away, or it begins to unravel over time and then it doesn't get fixed back. So that's a big issue. One of the things that I recommend to people is never cut the grass less than 6 inches. There's a lot of cities that are codifying that now. Franklin actually codifies that. You can't cut less, I think they say 5, but I always tell people 6 because it's just easier to measure. So don't cut it less than 6 inches. I tell HOAs all the time, if you're having the guys come mow it every 2 weeks during the summer, that's not a good idea. It's not what we want. It's supposed to look a little shaggy in there. It's supposed to look a little bit natural. It's not supposed to look like Augusta National. So, you know, that's kind of something to keep in mind. We want to remove accumulated sediment as soon as possible. And they say, listen, this stupid thing has been here for 30 years. What are you even talking about accumulated sediment? We are, have you ever heard that song that says that North Carolina and Tennessee are brother and sister? Have you ever heard that? Like, we used to be North Carolina before we were Tennessee, right? In North Carolina, if you are an HOA and you have a detention pond on your site, you have to do an as-built survey every 10 years. And if your holding volume has reduced, you have to regrade it out, okay? Now, why is that? The reason for that is we have to think about what was the original purpose of detention ponds. Originally, we were after water quality and quantity, but somewhere along the line, we kind of forgot about the quality and just focused on the quantity, okay? But originally, the idea was we'll put water in these ponds, it slows down less than 2.5 feet per second, and everything falls out of suspension, and that's great. And that's how we'll clean the water before we discharge it, okay? The problem is that builds up over time, and it builds up a lot, okay? And then ultimately, it'll clog the whole thing up and it won't work. So some of these other regulating bodies around the country have actually realized that, and they're now starting to require as-built surveys and the regrading of these ponds back to the original construction plans. We're not doing that really yet here in Tennessee, but I expect that'll happen in the future. And then the last thing is an idea that I came up with. Explore the idea of converting a detention pond to a wildflower meadow. So we've actually already done this one time. This is St. John Missionary Baptist Church. This is down in Antioch area. And I became pretty good good friends with the pastor down there. His name's Gary Murray. And we cleaned out his pond because they had a violation with Metro. And I came back later and I said, hey, Gary, would you let me kind of do an experiment here? And he was like, well, I don't know. What do you want to do? And I said, look, the problem is, if you don't know, it's something like 60 to 80% of pollinators worldwide have died over the last 20 years, right? Without pollinators, we don't eat, right? That's a problem. Just 2-3 weeks ago, it was on 60 Minutes about the monarch butterflies. Did anybody see that? It was amazing. So monarch butterflies, every 9th generation, they have a super generation that lives for an entire year. Nobody knows why, nobody knows how, but they have a super generation that lives an entire year. So if monarch butterflies are born on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains, they migrate all the way from Mexico, all the way up into the United States, all the way up into Canada, and then every 9th generation, I think it is, they have a super generation that lasts for a year, and they all migrate back to Mexico, and they winter there, and then they have their babies, and they do it all over again. So what's interesting about monarch butterflies is that they only lay their eggs on milkweed. That's the only thing they lay their eggs on. And in fact, TDOT's got a program right now where you can get milkweed seeds from TDOT and plant them in your yard if you want to. The reason is because monarch butterflies are dying like crazy. And a lot of it's because of habitat destruction. So I was thinking about that. I've been thinking about that for years. And I was thinking about, I wonder if we could do that in a detention pond. And so we've actually started that. So back in, I think the first picture there on the left is back in like November or December. My crew went out there. Gary agreed. He was like, okay, we'll let you do it. So we went out there. We tilled up the entire bottom of this detention pond. And then we brought in black tarps and we laid on top of it. We weighted it down with rock. And we did that to kill all of the existing vegetation. So we killed all the existing vegetation. We left it there for months. So we left it there from November all the way till April. And then in April, we came back out, and when we did, we tilled it up again. That's there on the left. We tilled it up again so it'd be ready. And then we sowed wildflower seed, native Tennessee wildflower seed, all over the bottom of this pond. We sowed it like crazy, super, super thick. And then we took a water roller and rolled it out smooth so that it would push the seed down into the ground. And then here on the right, we put in coir netting. So coir is the stuff that's made out of coconut husk. It's biodegradable. It's just going to dissolve back into the soil over time and kind of act as fertilizer, really, for those seeds. And we put that in and basically stabilized everything and said, let's see what happens, okay? So I was just out there last week, and you can actually start to see, you can't tell really from the picture, it just looks like vegetation is starting to grow, but if you go out there, you can actually tell it's not weeds, it's the wildflowers. They're beginning to come up. So the goal here is going to be really simple. So if we can figure out a way to get this to work, what I'm going to do is start promoting this to HOAs, because they're paying a ton of money to get their detention ponds mowed all summer long, right? And we could convert these things to wildflower meadows, which would be incredibly beneficial for the environment, but also save HOAs a ton of money. It could be really, really, really valuable. Now, there is a drawback. After the first killing frost, when everything really gets, the wildflowers at that point will have all gone to seed. And so at that point, you really need to go in there and cut it back. And you have to remove that dead vegetation, because if you don't remove that dead vegetation, it's going to rot, and then you're going to be exporting nitrogen and phosphorus downstream, and you don't want to do that. But outside of that, it should work great. It should help with erosion. It should help with uptake from the stormwater. The plants in the pond should uptake a lot of the stormwater and the pollution. And then it should also turn into an incredibly beneficial native pollinator habitat, I hope, or at least that's the idea. So this is what happens when it doesn't go right. So this is a single family subdivision that I've been working with for a long time. They're over on Bell Road, outside on the east side of Nashville. And what you can see here is a pond that didn't have an as-built, and they used it as a sediment basin during construction, and then when they left, they just left, right? And so what you can see is just tons and tons and tons of sediment, topsoil runoff from the construction of that subdivision, right? It filled up the pond. over time, and then it got worse as the years went on, right? So it's an enormous amount of sediment that's left. You're losing a lot of your flow control effectiveness, and then you're also losing the design volume, which was the whole point in putting the stupid thing in to start with, right? So you're having downstream erosion, you're gonna have downstream flow control loss. There's a lot of things that will happen there. So you can actually see the cause and you can see the effects. This red arrow on the left, the orifice is down in there, but it's buried down in there like 6 inches. The sediment's that high up on top of it, and it really needs to be removed. And you can tell here, where I've drawn around in red, that's where the water level's getting up really high, and it's going over the weir structure into the flow control device. There's nothing really wrong with that. If we have a big enough storm, that's supposed to happen, but it shouldn't be happening every single time it rains. And if it does, that's an issue. Removing this sediment is not easy. It takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of equipment. This is a pond that we did in Franklin, probably, I don't know, like 5 years ago. But you can actually see, the reason I like to show this is it's a good indication of the depth of sediment that actually collects inside of these things. The Mini X right here is about to stick its arm in the mud that's down there. This is the sediment that's just off the bottom of that pond. So you can tell the entire bucket just goes down into the sediment, right? So this is a pond that's been in place for 20, 25 years, but that level of sediment has accumulated in the bottom of that pond. If that sediment's there, then the volume's not there, right? And so if the volume's not there, I don't even know what the pond's there for. It's kind of a waste of time at that point, okay? So that's one of the examples. This I kind of call a hybrid pond. I guess technically it's a wet pond, but it's really more of a detention pond with micropool, for those of you who have seen that in the manual before. This is really popular in like Wilson County, Mount Juliet area. I see it a lot over there, sometimes down in Rutherford County, but there's always going to be a little bit of wet storage over on the left-hand side. You can see that where things are separating out in the water column, and they're hoping for infiltration. And then if you have a large storm event, the orifice here on the right-hand side will start controlling the storm, and if it gets high enough, it'll go into the other orifice, I guess, at the top there. So you see that quite often. The biggest issue with these, honestly, is cattails. Cattails is the biggest problem, and the reason is because the water level, the depth of the water level is almost always like 4 inches or 6 inches. It's almost nothing, okay? And so it's an ideal habitat for cattails, to which people will say, so what, right? What difference does that make? The reason it matters is because cattail population exports phosphorus and it exports nitrogen, believe it or not. They give off more than they take up. And so you start to think to yourself, why do we have bioretention? Why are there plants in bioretention? A big part of it is sediment, but another huge part of it is for dissolved pollutants like phosphorus, nitrogen, bacteria, and stuff like that. So if we're exporting it, we're kind of wasting our time, right? So it's nothing wrong with that design. There's certainly a lot of them out there, but as far as maintenance is concerned, we really have to stay on top of it, make sure it's doing what it's supposed to. And then, of course, there are underground detention ponds. Not something we see a lot in Sumner County, of course, but a little bit. It's starting now. I think here in Gallatin, over there where the new hot dog place is, what's that place called? You know what I'm talking about, over there across from the plantation? Double Dogs, yeah. They put a big underground detention system in there, I think. I think it was actually a metal one, actually. But all of these are basically the same. They definitely have different uses in different places. You see the concrete a lot downtown, like in the Gulch, places like that. The metal is usually the least expensive option if the contractor has time for them to fabricate it. And the ADS chambers that are over here on the right, those are used a lot when you have a big footprint. So if you have a big Walmart footprint and you can put it under the whole parking lot, sometimes you'll see those because they're really easy. You can just go grab them off the shelf. They're all the same size, they're all standard. So it's kind of dependent upon the project, which one gets used, and they all have different usages. Wet ponds or retention ponds, we see those, it depends on where you're at. A lot of those in like Brentwood where they have fountains in the ponds and things like that. We need to always monitor the invasive and aquatic plants. The algae want to take these things over in a hurry. That's a big part of what they want to do. And so we have to remove the accumulated sediment from the forebay especially to keep that from happening. And we do that usually about every year if we can talk the property owner into contracting with us. But the biggest thing with these is keeping the pump working. The fountain that's in the middle of the pond is pretty and all, but it also forces dissolved oxygen back down into the back down into the pond. And by forcing that dissolved oxygen into the pond, what happens is you create an environment where the algae just doesn't want to grow. And that's the best way to keep the algae at bay, is to create a really rich oxygen environment. Even if you just use a bubbler like this here on the right, sometimes you see those in farm ponds, and it does an incredible job of keeping the algae and the vegetation at bay. One of the things that we just recently did is this is a pond that's down in Franklin, and we have been working with them for, well, since we started the company, 5 or 6 years, and they could not get water to hold in this pond. There's a lot of bald cypress around it, and they reach out and they stick their roots up and they puncture liners and stuff like that. And so the question was, what are we going to do? I guess we'll put it in a liner that's only $120,000. So what in the world, is there an alternative? And so we started looking at this, and what we realized was this is actually pretty good. You can see the weir box over there. The water level's not as high as it should be, but in a dry condition, it got so low that it was just nearly nothing there, right? This is actually a pretty wet condition. I went out there during a really wet condition, and I started to notice that the water around the outlet structure was not actually going into the structure. It was going around the structure and then hitting the pipe and running along the pipe, and then it would find a gap in the concrete and it would drop in, and then that's where it would go. So I talked to the HOA manager. I said, I think I got something that'll work. Let's try it out. So what we did is we actually crawled up in the pipe on a dry day, crawled up in the pipe and drilled some holes in the pipe, and then we injected epoxy up into all along the pipe. And what it did is it stopped it. It basically stopped the ability of water to migrate down the pipe and into it. And now, if you go out there, you can actually see the water's all the way up to the weir. So instead of spending like $120,000, they spent like 10. It was a dramatically less expensive solution that essentially solved the same problem. This is, of course, what we see the most of, though, bioretention. Bioretention is extremely widely used here in the Middle Tennessee area, as well as just basically anywhere in America these days. It's usually about 3 foot thick of media, and the biggest and most important and most neglected part of bioretention, in my opinion, is either the plants or the mulch. The mulch is key. It is really, really, really key. And in order to understand that, you have to understand how this system works, okay? So I said I was living in Baltimore when they rolled it out. The reason they rolled it out in Baltimore is because they have a big problem in the Chesapeake Bay with phosphorus and nitrogen, okay? So in order to get phosphorus and nitrogen out of stormwater, you either have to have a chemical or a biological process, all right? So somebody came up with the idea that if we have bioretention with plants in it, that those plants will be able to thrive off that nitrogen and phosphorus, and as a result, clean the stormwater, okay? So a lot of different mixes started being used, and then the one that we use here, shown over there on the right-hand side, they're kind of like potting soil, but not really. They flow really, really, really fast. They're very open graded mixtures, okay? The problem with bioretention media, though, is because it's really open, that sediment wants to get down in there. And when it gets down in there, it clogs up those openings in the bioretention media. If it ever clogs it up, there's no way to get it out. It's in there, and that's it, right? So how do you deal with that? Well, the way you deal with that is with the mulch, but it has to be the exact right kind of mulch. You have to be using shredded, preferably triple shredded or at least double shredded, hardwood non-dyed mulch. And if you use that, then it won't float away. The water has to go through the mulch before it gets to the media. And the reason that matters is it leaves all the sediment behind on the mulch. So if we remove and replace the mulch on a pretty regular basis, that media, which is really where the magic happens, it stays healthy and it stays good. I read one time that media that's in a bioretention system that's extremely healthy, one shovelful of it has more microorganisms in it than people who have ever lived on Earth combined. So if you can think about like the amount of life that's in these things is unimaginable. It's really interesting. The other big problem outside of mulch is I see landscapers using pre-emergent on these all the time, and that is a huge problem in my mind. And not just in my mind, I mean, everyone thinks so. Metro Water Services says that these things need to be treated as an aquatic site. You can't use herbicide in an aquatic site unless you're licensed to do that, and then you have to use special herbicides to do it. The reason for that is because the EPA says that granular pre-emergents, like, well, just basically any pre-emergent, are herbicides that cause a pretty significant disruption to invertebrates and other stuff that's in the water downstream. So it really doesn't need to be used, pesticides inside of these things. This is what it looks like when it's not working, and this is what it looks like when it's neglected. You can see my car keys over there on the left side. That's actually mulch right there. And what's happened is the stormwater's gone through the mulch and it's left behind sediment in the mulch, and that mulch has begun to migrate down into the media. And once it gets so far into the media, it'll cut off flow. It'll kill all the plants. The plants are kind of like the warning lights. If they're not doing well, that's bad. And so it'll kill all the plants, it'll plug it up, and then the whole thing starts going into bypass. Sometimes people will say, what difference does it make if the weeds are in there, if the plants are in there? The reason it matters is because the weeds, well, the invasives, they will choke out all the plants that are on the approved species list. What difference does that make? It matters because the species that are on the approved species list are, first off, they're native, which is really important, or close to being native. And they also are really drought tolerant, but they also have the ability to handle big storm events. So you have to find like this perfect plant. It has to be a plant that has a really fibrous root system. It has to be able to handle the fact that today I might get a foot of water and then I might not get any for 6 months. That's hard to find. And so if the weeds choke all of that out, then what happens is that we have a drought like we did last year, all the weeds die too, and then all of a sudden the media is not being broken up by the root action of those plants, and we're right back to getting clogged up and being messed up again. This is what it should look like. This is a bioretention system that we just got finished doing a maintenance on. This is actually the Edison at Paytona right here in Gallatin. It's just right over here on Greenlee. So one of the things that we like to do with bioretention is ring them with riprap. The reason we do that is because there's usually a sheer drop-off right from the downslope to the bioretention, and it causes a lot of erosion right there. I don't really care that, I mean, it's really clean dirt, except for that dirt is going to clog the media, and that's sort of the point. So we like to reinforce that where we can. It also looks really nice, honestly. And so sometimes folks will let us do that for them. What we do with bioretention is quarterly maintenance for the most part. And the reason for that is, in a big way, is to try to keep those weeds at bay. This is us doing a maintenance event. We never use chemicals. We remove invasives by hand because we can't get equipment down in there, really. We remove dead vegetation, remove accumulated sediment by hand. Again, we don't want to compact the media. Remember, it's very open graded. There's a lot of air in it, so you can't have a skid steer down in there or anything like that. And then we install new mulch as per the original specification. And as often as possible, we replace the plants and we add more. And the reason for that is the plants are like tillers that are there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Their roots are constantly moving, they're constantly growing, they're sloughing off, they're growing a different direction. It's constantly fluctuating like that. And it really, really works well when you start doing the tilling immediately after construction and you start beginning to work toward this. This is the ultimate goal. Once you got to this level, the amount of maintenance that you have to do is really, really low. So instead of doing quarterly maintenance, now you're coming in like every year and you're just essentially taking out the dead, cleaning up trash and debris, because the sediment is largely being taken care of by the plants themselves. We still need to remulch it and take out what accumulated sediment is there, but this is the goal. This is what we're trying to achieve, and it would be pretty awesome if every street that you saw in Nashville was lined with something like this. Permeable pavers are the other thing that we see a lot of, and again, the sediment is after it. The way that permeable pavers work is it goes down through the cracks in the bricks. It's not the bricks themselves. A lot of people think it's the bricks. It's not. The bricks are just bricks. I mean, they're not really that complicated. But the aggregate in between is 1/4 inch size in diameter. Sometimes it's 1/8 of an inch size in diameter, and it acts as a filter for the water as it moves through it. It leaves behind that sediment. And the problem with that is that when it leaves behind that sediment is now like a soil that can grow vegetation. And so you start to see this kind of stuff from time to time. It's not necessarily terrible, but it's also not great. And so the way we want to get rid of that and deal with that is with regular maintenance. So the pavements that are here on the left, you can see all of those. All of those are actually not doing well. The porous concrete is horrible. That stuff falls apart, and then it's nearly, you can't even really do much with it. We do maintain it, we try to maintain it, but restoring it back to full infiltration is nearly impossible. Places like this where the sediment has really caked into the pavers is an issue, but this is a far bigger issue. And you look at that and you say, well, what's wrong with it? There's no stone, okay? Or either the stone is settled or it's washed away or who knows what. But what happens is if there's no structural stone in between those pavers, the twisting and turning of the tires tears the pavers all to pieces. And then the next thing you know, the sediment's down under the pavers, down into the gravel beneath, and if it ever gets down there, it's really difficult to take it out. The way to keep that from happening, TDEC has in their manual that you're supposed to use a regenerative vector sweeper, regenerative air. You can never use water on this. If you see people with a power sprayer spraying it down, huge mistake. What happens is it drives the sediment down deeper where it's even harder to get out next time. So you don't want to ever use water. I recommend that people do the regenerative sweeper every year, and then every other year we'll come back and we'll put in, that crushed quarter clean to stabilize the bricks and stabilize the pavers. We do fix these on a pretty regular basis. Places where folks that are having pavers that are all tore up, we'll take them out, reinstall them, clean the aggregate below, reinstall the pavers with the quarter clean like we're supposed to. And then we also have other things that happen like this. This was a really odd situation. So we cleaned the pavers and we couldn't figure out why they weren't infiltrating. And you see that little brown line right there? What that is during construction, they didn't have a lot of sediment control. So they didn't have a lot of silt fences. And what happened was they had a really big storm event. There was a lot of sediment that washed onto the gravel, and then they didn't clean it. They just kept on building. And so it created this impermeable layer that was in the pavers where that we couldn't get the infiltration capacity that we were supposed to. So we ended up having to dig a bunch of it out and essentially rebuild it. But that was one of the lessons learned, is make sure your pavers are taken care of during construction. Otherwise, it'll be a problem after the fact. Another problem is pavers are used a lot on little projects. So those HPRs, like I was talking about, horizontal property regime, they'll take a 1 acre site, they'll take away that old ranch house, they'll put up 4 tall skinnies, and in between they'll have a bunch of permeable pavers. That's totally fine. They work great. There's nothing wrong with that. But the maintenance is difficult because you can't get in there with the regenerative truck, or it's not very easy to get in there with the regenerative truck. And so what we've done is we've kind of started using a system where we literally use flathead screwdrivers and an air compressor, and we blow it out that way. And then once we've blown it all out, we vac it up that way. And then of course, after we've done it, we come back and put in the crushed gravel as well. Now, if all hell breaks loose and the pavers are just completely clogged and they're still there, but you can't do anything with it, the only thing that I've seen that actually works, and there's research for this, is this machine here. It comes out of Minnesota. That's called a Typhoon. And what that thing does is inside there's these arms, and they actually don't turn real fast. They kind of turn slow. They have extremely strong jets of air that blow all the sediment and all the aggregate and everything out from between the pavers. It just completely blows it out. And then you come behind it with essentially a huge vacuum cleaner. You just suck it all up, and then you put the pavers back. Now that's the only thing that I've ever seen that will actually bring the pavers back to 100% capacity. But there's some research out there from University of Toronto that actually details it, and it's very, very compelling stuff. This is what your pavers should look like. This is one that we just got done with. You can see how that stone comes all the way up to the surface. That's really, really important. Hydrodynamic separators, proprietary devices, I just got about 5 minutes. There's a million of them on the market. AquaSwirl or AquaShield is the one we see probably the most here, and the reason for that is because they're from Chattanooga. So they were made in Chattanooga. They got bought. I don't think they're there anymore. But as a result of them being local, we see those here a lot. I love these things. And the reason I love them is because they're really simple to maintain. It's really, really simple to maintain, and it's also very, very, very predictable. So I've never, ever maintained one that it wasn't completely full of junk. I mean, it's always full of sediment. It's always full of trash and debris and everything else. They're always completely clogged with stuff. And it's predictable. You can say, if I come out here every year like they tell us to in the O&M manual, it's going to be full, I can back it out, and then we can be gone. Usually it doesn't require any confined space entry. Sometimes it does, but not always. And it really does a good job. Proprietary filters are kind of the next step up from those hydrodynamic separators. They filter the water, and it's what's required if you're in Metro Nashville and you can't infiltrate. If you can't do bioretention, then you have to do one of these. These are approved by New Jersey. New Jersey is kind of the end-all be-all on the eastern side of the country as far as proprietary systems are concerned. And there's a bunch of companies that make different stuff. We've maintained all of these at one point or the other, and I'm agnostic as far as which one that I like or don't like. They all have positives and negatives and good things and bad things about them. This is a storm filter that we did. The reason I show this is I like for people to actually see what's in the stormwater. So this is what would go into the lake, right? Or this is what would go into the river, and what did for years and years and years, but it doesn't anymore, or at least not as bad as it used to. The filters that you can see there on the left are all torn up. They're needing maintenance really bad. And then when you get down inside, you can actually see sometimes that they end up getting pounded by stuff and falling apart and everything. So the way that we maintain them is, first off, we take all the filters out, we take them to the surface, and then we suck out all the sediment that's on the bottom of the vault. And then when we get to the top, we take the cartridges apart and we pull those out, and then we suck all the media that's inside the cartridges, we suck all of that up. We take the shells and we send them back to the company, but we usually have brand new cartridges that are right there that day, and we just click those in. And then you know, we're on our way. Now, the way that you can tell if these things are working or not working is, first off, if you show up and it looks like that previous picture, they're not working. The second thing that you can tell is if there's water in the vault and it hadn't rained in the last 2 or 3 days, it's not working. If there's 4 or 5 inches of sediment on the bottom of the vault, it's not working. And then the last one, and this is the one that's tricky, if there's a 1/4 inch of sediment that's on top of the cartridges, 1/4 inch of sediment on top of the cartridges. If that's there, they're also not working. And the reason for that is it's an indication that water is moving too slowly through the filters and out the system. And because of that, stuff's falling out of suspension. And that one's the hardest one to catch. So what we do at EverGreen is notice the violations. Those happen all the time, right? Comes from different cities, you know, Chattanooga, Knoxville. We're working down in Atlanta and Alabama and Florida and places now as well, North Carolina. The city sends a letter of violation to a property owner. They get in contact with us, and what we do is we provide them with a plan to get them back into compliance, and then once they're back into compliance, we'll put them on a plan. And the plan is either EverCare Standard or EverCare Complete. And what we do under that is EverCare Standard is real simple. We go out every 6 months, we do the inspections, we do the professional reports, we file it with the city. For a long time, that's all I did. But what happened, because I kind of felt like it was a conflict of interest to do the maintenance as well. But so much of the time, I had people saying to me, "Hey, Van, I don't really know what you're talking about. I don't even really care. You know, can you just fix it?" And so I started fixing it. And then I started providing EverCare Complete. And what we do with EverCare Complete is like the buyer retention. We go out there and we're going out there to inspect it anyway, so we just maintain it as well. So we add maintenance to the contract. We do that on a regular basis. This is an example of what one of our reports looks like. There's me doing some inspection there. And then this is us with the crew talking about how to do it and what to do and what not to do, some of that. Been doing this a really long time. This is the first maintenance event that I was involved in. This is actually down in San Antonio when I was living down there with a pump truck that they had there with the city, and we coordinated all this to do a maintenance for everybody when I was down there. And I have literally been doing this since 2007, you know, crawling around in sewers here and there and everywhere. It's a funny story about this one. I was actually, my twins were like 1, and it was raining in San Antonio, and that's the first filter that I knew of anywhere in San Antonio, and I kept trying to catch it full of water so I could put it in my presentation. And it came a rain, and it was like 10 minutes from my house, and so I loaded the kids up. I loaded my wife up, and we rolled over to this place, and this was a CVS that was in front of these apartments. It was across the interstate from UTSA, and so the kids that lived in these apartments kind of used CVS as like their grocery store. And so I got out of the truck, and I had my tools, and I go over there, and I'm pulling the manhole out. As I'm walking, I see that there's these 2 girls that are under the porch at CVS, and I just happened to notice they were there. I didn't pay attention. I kept going. I pulled the thing up. I'm laying down in the parking lot. It's raining. I look awful. It's muddy. You know, it's a mess. And I was trying to get pictures of these filters. And I kind of hear this noise. And I look up, and it's those 2 girls. There's been a slack in the rain, and they're trying to get back to their apartment. And they're like maybe 5 feet from me, and they're right over here. And I heard one of them say to the other one, "Just keep walking." And I told the guy at work, and he said, "What you should have said is you should have said, 'Would one of you mind stepping into my office?'" So the last thing that I wanted to mention is that we have changed. We have a new brand. We're now EverGreen Infrastructure. We started out as EverGreen Site Solutions. There's a lot behind that, and I'm not going to go into a ton of it, but we're going to be providing a lot of things in the future that we haven't done in the past. I'm really excited about what we're going to be doing. So thank y'all. Thank you for your time.
Got a couple of minutes for questions. Thank you, Van. I think probably this is a room where people have also said to us, just keep walking. A lot of the work that we do, so I think you're not alone in that.
That's right.
And I appreciate the way that, you know, all of this work, like you said, just keeps coming back to impacting the river, impacting the lake, like why this is also critical to be doing.
Sure.
Any questions for Van? Or are there any questions online that you all are seeing? Okay.
Anybody?
I'd just like to say on that typhoon, I run a remedial maintenance division for a permeable paver installer.
Yeah.
We did a maintenance at a park in Knoxville last week using a typhoon, and we did a ring test for pre-treatment. It's 25 inches per hour.
Yeah, that's right.
We did a ring test post-treatment. It's 575 inches per hour.
What was the first one?
25. It was clogged.
I'm not surprised by that at all. It's the only thing I've ever seen.
In southeast United States that's got good equipment.
Yeah, it really works really, really well. And it definitely restores the pavers back. I think the reason that TDEC recommends the regenerative is, number one, it's a lot more available. There's a lot of people have them. And number two, they're meant for you to do it every year or two. But when it gets real clogged, like what you're talking about, and it's lost its infiltration capacity, the typhoon's the only thing that brings it back, in my experience, the only thing I've ever seen. So you're exactly right. Anything else? Anybody else?
How do those vaults, what is your preferred method of getting those filters out?
So it depends on which product it is, honestly. And I am agnostic. I know I used to work for Contec, but I'm just going to tell you the way it is, what I've seen in the field. The storm filter that Contec makes is the easiest one to deal with. You get down inside and you turn it a quarter turn, and it just clicks out, and it's got these 2 holes in the top of it. You hook, we've got a chain that has 2 hooks on it. So we hook those in there, and then we just pull them to the surface because they're real heavy. So you pull them to the surface, and then you do all the disassembly and everything at the surface, and you reinstall it. It's real simple. The other one, you remember the blue one? That one is Upflow Filter. That's Hydro International. That's their product. It also is really good. So inside of those blue boxes, there's these little levers, and you open those up, and you pull them out, and you pull out the media, which is in like these bags, and it's pretty easy to pull those out and redo it. The other one though, the one ADS has, the Bay filter, that thing is a nightmare. Every one of those cartridges weighs like 500 pounds, and it's nearly impossible to like get them out. I mean, it's just it's a mess to deal with. So it just kind of depends, you know. I mean, all of them can be done though, and truthfully, I really think a lot of times people think that the proprietary stuff is difficult, and it's not difficult. It's just all of it's in one little spot. And so when you come out and you look at a bio and it's the size of this room, everybody's like, oh, well, that's not so bad. And then if you look at a little vault and it's over here in this corner and it's just inundated with stuff, then it looks like it's really terrible. It's actually not. I prefer the proprietary stuff because there's a lot less guesswork. The O&M manuals, all the companies, it doesn't matter which one, they all have an O&M manual. They all get New Jersey approval. And in order to get New Jersey approval, you have to be able to demonstrate annual maintenance. And so I don't care what they say in their O&M manual, they're all sized to do annual maintenance. Now, will they last longer in the field? Sometimes they will. Like if you know what you're looking for, like those things I said about the storm filter, if there's not water in the vault, if there's not 4 inches of sediment, if there's not sediment on top of the cartridge, then it's not ready to be changed. So it can go a little bit longer. It's just kind of hit or miss. So. But, you know, I hope that's the reason why people call me, you know, is I know that stuff, right? Anybody else? All right, thank y'all.